Welcome to the reality show, day 105 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Kirk Wilcox and Jonathan Honig. We will be joined by Mark Pellegrino any minute now, and we are talking about our favorite group of dictators of the world unite in the United Nations, and we are, sometimes we ask questions in the titles. This one, there is no question. It's not, can the United Nations be fixed? How do we fix the United Nations? It's the United Nations cannot be fixed. I imposed this title on my co-panelists, so they are not necessarily responsible. They might not agree. Maybe they think it should be, it can be fixed. Maybe they think it shouldn't be fixed. It's already perfect. Jonathan, is the United Nations perfect?
Well, I want to welcome, if I could, Razi, with your permission, Race Jacobson, who's a new member of our channel here. So happy to have you along for the discussion. And Razi, it's a great example, I think, of where we can really learn from Miss Rand. She wrote explicitly about the United Nations, I believe in the late 60s and 1970s. And everything she said, and we'll get into a lot of it, I think rings so true today. And the only justification, as I think about it now, I can even imagine for the United Nations is a time like before mass communication, where you literally needed a place for everyone to go and physically talk because there wasn't the internet and fax machines and all this other shit we have now. So, now I think it more than ever does exactly what Ms. Rand said, which is basically legitimize and embolden some of the worst countries on earth. I mean, would you go to a party with the people who show up at the United Nations, the heads of some of the absolute worst theocratic dictatorships you can imagine? I mean, would you legitimize them by shaking the hands of their representatives? I wouldn't, but that's what the UN does, and it does it on prime US soil decade after decade after decade.
I don't know. I think Antonio Gutierrez looks like he knows how to party, so maybe. Kirk.
All right. So why don't we get started by reading part of the preamble to the United Nations? Have you guys read this before? We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards for life in larger freedom, which sounds good on paper. This sounds great. One of the problems, as we know, is one of the five permanent members with veto power, the Russia, formerly known as the Soviet Union, at the time was ruled by a guy by the name of Joseph Stalin. And I'm sure some of our listeners are aware of the bloody history of the Soviet Union, but here's some excerpts from the book Bloodlands, written by historian Timothy Snyder, where he talks about how, all right, now my Kindle app is freezing. Okay, there we go. Okay, thanks, Kindle. Anyway, he talks about how when Stalin came to power, and he was trying to, when he said that the labor of building socialism would be like raising the ocean. That December, Stalin announced that the kulaks would be liquidated as a class. And then later on in the book, he further talks about the Ukrainian famine. By summer of 1932, as Stalin knew, more than 1 million people had already starved to death in Soviet Kazakhstan. Stalin blamed the local party leader, Philip Goloshetkin, but he must have understood some of the structural issues. Stalin, a master of personal politics, presented the Ukrainian famine in personal terms. His first impulse and his lasting tendency was to see the starving of Ukrainian peasants as a betrayal by the members of the Ukrainian Communist Party. Stalin could not allow the possibility that his own policy of collectivization was to blame. The problem must be in the implementation in the local leaders, anywhere but the concept itself. As Stalin pushed forward with his transformation of the first half of 1932, the problem he saw was not the suffering of his people, but rather the possibility that the image of his collectivization policy might be tarnished. Starving Ukrainian peasants, Stalin complained, were leaving their home republic and demoralizing other Soviet citizens by their whining. Stalin seemed to think in the spring of 1932 that if starvation could somehow just be denied, then it would go away. Perhaps he reasoned that the Ukraine was in any case overpopulated and that the deaths of a few 100,000 people would matter little in the long run. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the 5 founding members of the United Nations. And why were they one of the permanent members with veto power? Other than the Soviet Union just happened to share a common enemy with better countries like the United States and the United Kingdom during World War II, an enemy, keep in mind that Stalin and the Soviet Union helped enable and start World War II. And as we know, it doesn't end there. Ted Pichoni of the Brookings Institute back in 2018 wrote a paper about how China has used the United Nations to launder its reputation. Saying that following the Tiananmen Square protest, Chinese officials found themselves for the first time facing international human rights scrutiny. China stepped up its engagement primarily out of a desire to protect itself from scrutiny and therefore took positions such as limiting the UN's regime's ability to focus on individual countries. China's 1991 white paper, an effort to mitigate the negative media it faced after Tiananmen Square, emphasized that Chinese citizens are allowed to exercise their individual rights and freedoms only to the extent that they do not violate state interests, the interests of society at large or of the collective, and the rights of other citizens. The white paper signaled a period of China's stepped up engagement on human rights at the UN, primarily from a defensive posture, and was the first example of what Chinese leaders have referred to as human rights with Chinese characteristics. This approach to human rights is consistent with China's policy today with respect to central arguments. The People's Republic has not changed its position in more than 2 decades. And going on to say from 1990, sorry if I keep going on, but anyway, yeah, that's and I'll link to that paper in the chat if anyone's curious to read this. But yeah, it's just more of the same. Horrible countries essentially use the United Nations to launder its reputation. And the United States gives what, billions of dollars in taxpayer money to this and hosts it in New York City and invites some of the biggest loons, goons, and buffoons around the world to the United States as if we're all equals to discuss world peace and how to respect human rights. It's a complete joke.
So just quickly before I go to Mark, Kirk, the part you read about Stalin, do you know if that was before he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize or after or between the 2 times he was nominated? Actually, it was before the first
I'm not
time I checked it.
Oh, it was before.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was about to say this doesn't even mention the purges in the late 1930s.
Yeah, he was nominated in the 40s. And yeah, also, just one more point. Yeah, the idea of the Security Council, the 5 permanent members have veto power. So you have to have consensus to have, to have agreement on, to have anything pass. The only way you get consensus is when the West gives in on its interest. That's
like,
the only time.
Over what? That's the funny thing. It's always like, well, we have this proclamation and this over what? There is no legitimacy to this. It's just a bunch of people in a rooms, so it's like this idea that the UN has some power, I think is what needed. It's a debate society in an era when we have social media. And
so when it comes to the Security Council, it is unfortunately taken seriously and mostly by, the victims, mostly by the West. But Mark, before you joined, we picked our names out of a hat and decided who is for and who is. So you are arguing for the United Nations. So
oh, come on, man, come on.
Kidding.
That is an
Do
impossible
you think the United
task.
Nations can be fixed? Do you think
No.
we should try to fix it? What should we do about it?
No, we should start by defunding it and having them go elsewhere to have their little, as Jonathan said, debate society. I think we should disband it altogether. We definitely shouldn't be involved in it. The only power that they actually have is the power to influence public opinion. And by the public, I mean stupid people who actually think that the stats that these authoritarian creeps are quoting actually have meaning, and they usually use those stats to pile on in social media against people who are pro-Israel, for example, because the UN just loves to pass resolutions against Israel. I think they're a little shy with China and Russia and Iran, but they sure love to pile on human rights violations on Israel. I can't take a country seriously that pretends there could be any form of agreement between authoritarian countries and basically free countries. There can't. As you said just a few minutes ago, any compromise with that kind of poison is death. It's a compromise for them. It's a victory for the bad guys. So you gotta, I think what they should do, kick them out of New York, scrub the building clean, maybe even demolish it and start anew. Put in some condominiums in there or some office buildings for people, but get those punks out of there. And irritatingly, some of these people have, diplomatic immunity and diplomatic rights in the city that make them extremely annoying. They can double park. They don't get tickets. They can't get arrested. Kick these fuckers out. Sorry, get them out.
Yeah, Akira, so there's a few, actually, this was Willful Thinker. There's a few nice comments in the chat that I'm going to read, even though they're not super chats. But yeah, our request for funding from the UN has yet to go through. So we are funded by your generosity. So consider sending a super chat or becoming a member. Willful Thinker says, how do we leave the UN? I think, Mark, you pretty much answered it.
You just do it.
Yeah. And kick them out and stop giving them a quarter of their funding, which is what the US does. Nastasia asks, what to do without the UN? So, I mean, I'd like to see like some sort of organization of free countries, and that might actually have any benefit. But let me turn the question around on you. What is it that we're not going to have without the UN that we have now, except this large bill for the American taxpayer and dictators telling us that we are violating rights? Jonathan.
Rand has so much great material on the UN in particular. The article, The Anatomy of Compromise from Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, is a must read. And even in, some other areas, like in the Ayn Rand letter, I'll quote one line of hers. She was obviously vehemently against it. She said, when an institution reaches the degree of corruption, brazen cynicism, and dishonor demonstrated by the UN in its shameful history, to discuss it at length is to imply that its members and supporters may possibly be making an innocent error about its nature, which is no longer possible. I mean, this should have been over, 20 years ago when they first started putting, was it Iran on the Human Rights Council? I mean, yeah. It's a effing joke. And what I hate, to Mark's point, is that it legitimizes these countries. It says, well, you got US over here, free countries over here, and you've got Iran and North Korea and, communist China over here as if they're the same. It's an insult. And I wouldn't stand in the same room as leaders of these countries, let alone shake their hands and engage with them.
Yeah, by the way, I was joking when I said he looks like he knows how to party, Gutierrez, and even if he does, I would not take part in that party. Akira asked, it occurred to me, couldn't you buy ads in The Guardian saying it sucks? We don't have the kind of funding that The Guardian has, but also I don't think I would do that. What I would like is for people to, after this show, go give a preemptive like to our episode tomorrow, debunking The Guardian's lies on Israel. That's not the exact title, but that is the show. And yeah, send it to Owen Jones and your favorite Guardian writers. We will be going through some bullshit that they say on that.
I'll just jump in. People are saying, well, what are we going to do without the UN? And Razi, to your point, what are we giving up? We can always give, U.S. issue statements all the time. They engage in debate. They can give proclamations. They can have press conferences. It's not as if international discourse or diplomacy ends with the abolition of the UN. But what happens? What's the benefit other than legitimizing these terrible ideas in terrible countries?
Kirk, how will your life be worse off without the UN?
think maybe we should be asking how life could be a lot better. And, there are a lot of pernicious impacts that I don't think a lot of people really take into account. I know it's been speculated. There was this piece on foreignpolicy.com back in 2020, yeah, April 2020, written by Henrik Feldwisch Dentrup about how the World Health Organization, which is a division within the United Nations, became China's coronavirus accomplice. Beijing is pushing to become a public health superpower and quickly found a willing international power. And yeah, if you recall, like back in the early days of COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty. And if you recall, the Chinese Communist Party was cracking down on whistleblowers and people trying to spread information about this mysterious disease and whatnot. I'm not sure if the World Health Organization helped on that front. It's been speculated. It would not surprise me if that was the case. So it's like, imagine if we did not have the United Nations. Maybe we find out about the coronavirus sooner. Then you look at people like Elon Musk. He's often been asked, like, why does he let Ayatollah Ali Khamenei have a Twitter account, an account on his social media website, when he's like this guy that's like, involved in all these horrible things and whatnot. And Elon Musk's standard is like, look, if he's recognized by the United Nations, then we're going to allow him on Twitter and have a voice and whatnot. Which I find astonishing, because if you guys recall, the United Nations, their whole division on what I forget what the exact title of it is, but like the head of the guy, this guy from the United Nations was essentially saying that Elon Musk could end world hunger with just $6 billion. And Elon Musk said, why don't you show me the numbers of how this is going to work out, and I'll sell Tesla stock tomorrow to end world hunger. And of course, he got all weaselly about it and all flaky about it. And Elon Musk, there are a lot of criticisms. I think he exposed the United Nations for being a bunch of hucksters with the way they frame these things. This is a talking point that's been going on for years. Everyone says, oh, we could end world hunger with if billionaires just stop being greedy. Turns out that's not the case. As for this question about like what kind of international organization might we have, I would have to look further into it, but there's this Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which I don't think is part of the United Nations. It was founded in 1961. I don't know if there are any downsides to this organization. I've often used it as a resource when talking about economics and videos I made for my channel. But do you guys know anything about this organization? Is it better than the UN? Would it be a more preferable alternative?
The OECD.
Yeah.
I don't know enough to really comment. I don't think there's any organization out there right now of countries that I would be super happy about. I mean, I think NATO was a good idea. I would make some changes, like add Ukraine, delete Turkey. But um, Jonathan, you look like you have something to say.
Well, I'm going back to what I only think of the only good UN moment I can remember. This is before everyone here's time, but do you remember this history of back in the height of the Cold War in the early 1960s, when Adlai Stevenson presented to the UN, presented to the Soviet representative that they had the evidence that they were building, missile sites in Cuba? I mean, this is an ancient history, but there's a pretty famous moment there. It was, the United Nations standing up for itself, presenting the evidence and kind of speaking honestly and speaking truthfully. So, what about, I'm going to throw this out there, it's an idea. What about if the US just spoke up more at the UN, spoke more forcibly, kind of called a spade? There's always so much, oh my gosh, did President Biden call President Xi a dictator? I mean, what if the US used the UN as an opportunity to speak out more forcibly? Would that change anyone's mind?
I feel like that's sort of like saying speaking up forcibly on Twitter is going to change people's minds. It really doesn't. I mean, especially people like that. They're so entrenched in their ideology. That's how they live. Their livings are made by parasitizing their people. There's no way they're going to turn around, especially if they're shamed in public. They just don't operate that way. So I think you just got to leave. You got to leave. You can make a statement publicly to the American people, which would be broadcast to the world, that the United Nations is an illegitimate organization, and point out the reasons why, and just leave and defund. Leave and defund.
Yeah, I mean, I remember fondly the time when John Bolton was the U.S. Ambassador to the UN. I'm a John Bolton fan generally. He was ambassador for a while. He wasn't approved by the Senate, so he was appointed by executive order. So it didn't last long, but it was fun while it lasted, and it didn't really change anything long term. So yeah, it was like reading a nice tweet and retweeting it. I think it's a good comparison. Yeah, Kirk, what you're saying about this UN guy who had ideas for how to end poverty with Elon Musk's money. I mean, whenever I hear politicians suggest what they can do with somebody else's money, first it's laughable, then it's actually terrifying because they have the power to forcefully take that money from that person, and they often do. And one other point, I see that The Guardian has been mentioned in the chat as well. One of the things I remember, this channel was a different channel up until October 6th and from October 7th. And the reality show was a different show. And one of the things I really liked that maybe we should bring back in at least on Sundays on the reality show extra is this segment that we had, The Guardian Says the Darndest Things, which was a segment we would do from time to time. What I think my favorite was it 15 ways you can conserve water? And one of them was don't flush. And another one was, take like 3-minute showers or something. And yeah, these people are, they're consistent at least in some things. Yeah, it's an interesting newspaper. We're just going to talk about them in one specific on one specific issue tomorrow. But yeah, for Sunday's show, we might get a little Guardian Says the Darndest Things segment together. We'll find some of their more humorous gems. Kirk.
I think I forgot to wrap up that point with Elon Musk. I think the point I was getting at was this guy clearly knows that this is a shady organization with some shady members, and still he uses the United Nations as a standard on how to operate his website and who to let on and who not to let on.
But
Um,
there's
but yeah,
something about
this is something I feel like is missing from a lot of politicians in America. A lot of politicians, especially every presidential election, they like to talk tough. Just the other night, I saw Nikki Haley talking tough about foreign policy. She was part of the UN under the Trump administration, and I'm like, where's the toughness? I mean, it's all fake. It comes off as fake to me. I don't mean to say it like that, but it's like, how come none of the, DeSantis, Haley, they like to talk tough, and none of them have ever said, you know what, the United Nations, this is essentially a reputation laundering scheme. Often people talk about money laundering schemes. It's a reputation laundering scheme for some of the worst actors in the world. That would be a good way to really show that you're tough and serious on foreign policy. Let's talk about evicting this reputation laundering scheme for horrible actors like the Islamic Republic of Iran and Communist China and Russia and Saudi Arabia and the rest of the loons, goons, and buffoons who are out to make the world a worse place.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I'll just say I agree, Kirk, and it goes a lot to what Rand always talked about in terms of sanction. Like it means a lot with that the fact that representatives from Iran who called for the US and Israel's destruction can like get a nice car from LaGuardia to go into Manhattan and stay at a nice hotel. I mean, what if the story was that they're not allowed in the US? Or they can't get a table in if you had a restaurant, would you let these guys come in and have a table? And that's why I have to say I always grimaced when President Trump would say, he's a wonderful relationship with Xi. He has a wonderful relationship with the head of
Oh
North.
my God.
It's like, how could you have a relationship with someone like that? And it's that sanction that really bothers me more than anything else. And that's, I think, a lot of what the UN does. It legitimizes some of the worst countries on earth as being like, and to your point, Kirk, it's like, well, let's take a vote. As if the vote of North Korea means shit. It means nothing. It means less than nothing. And I hate the fact that it gives them the legitimacy they don't deserve.
Yeah,
Yeah, let North Korea and South Korea come have a vote on where the demilitarized zone should be, and it's a disgrace.
Exactly.
Yeah, one thing I like about these votes, like I enjoy somewhat about these votes in the General Assembly, is especially the ones on Israel, is you see, North Korea, Iran, you see the kind of countries that vote, on one side, and then France pops up on that side as well, and all sorts of countries that you would expect maybe not expect more from, but hope for more from. And Britain, of course, every single time abstains. Um, yeah, Mark, I don't know if you were on any of those UN episodes because we've done a lot of, a lot of shows on the UN, and I've suggested if they're worried about, losing the headquarters, there's this, this famous arrow or missile shaped skyscraper in Pyongyang that they built. This is like the tallest building in North Korea. It's
What is
tall,
it? What is
tall,
it?
man.
Five stories?
Uh,
No,
no,
they
it's an actual.
started
I
in
think
the
it.
80s and it's still not done yet, right?
I think it was done. At least the outside of it is done, but I think it was built as a hotel or something, and then they realized they have no tourists, mostly because you can't go there as a tourist. Um, and yeah. Anyway, so it's an empty building. You have lots of these, oddly enough, in communist countries, and yeah, that's perfect for
Well,
the
it'll be
next UN
great because
headquarters.
it'll be built to communist building standards. So when they all pile in there, the whole thing will collapse on top of it and we'll take care of the UN in one fell swoop.
I neither endorse nor well, I do endorse that anyway.
I gotta say, not to get off the topic here, but what Jonathan just reminded me how cringy Trump was when saying he's a great friend to Putin and Kim Jong-il, and I thought this should be an automatic disqualifier for anybody who still likes this creep. Why isn't it an automatic disqualifier?
I think, and that kind of goes back to that, just that basic idea of sanction, and that Rand seemed to talk a lot about, and the idea of you wouldn't shake your hand, and we've mentioned that moment where Rand, I believe, told Isabel Patterson in a moment of anti-Semitism, Rand said, I'm Jewish, broke up that. So it's like speaking up. It means so much more oftentimes than even wielding necessarily force. And I think we underestimate maybe the power that Mark and Kirk, to your point, that expelling the United Nations, or perhaps just quitting the U.S. quitting and saying we're not going to be part of illegitimate organizations would go a long way, much more than funding another missile system, which I'm against, but it's about the moral sanction much more than the military might.
I mean, the U.S. quitting, first of all, that's a quarter of their budget, and kicking them out, yeah, that's it's going to be very significant, and you have money for more missile systems if you have that extra money in your budget, or you can not tax people for that money. It's another thought. Thank you, Akira, for the super chat. Akira says, "What if Ayn Rand organizations?" Razi in parentheses became UN members. I mean, I'm a UN member in the sense that I live in a UN member country. I would not take a job at the UN, although they are much better paying than my job. But there's more to life than money. Thank you, Robert, for the super chat. Robert says, I'll agree to fund the United Nations. I mean, look, if you want to call us the United Nations and then send super chats uh, because of that, then I can get behind that. So, yeah, actually not formally, because I think if they sue us, we can't afford to defend ourselves. And thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says, Mark Pellegrino is always amazing. I'm so happy that this courageous guy was saved from Beirut. Mark is off camera right now. That is a reference to something he was on, and he will tell us what it is. My apologies, Mark, for not knowing that off the top of
You
my
haven't
head.
seen Beirut?
I have not.
Okay, well, you
The
should see it.
name, the title would kind of put me off, but is that a movie or a TV show?
It's a movie with John Hamm. Um, very good. I play his best friend in it. So check it out.
I'm putting it
All
on
right.
my.
It's actually not to give a spoiler alert, but it's pro-Israel.
Well, I'm convinced. Yeah, Mark Pellegrino is a Hollywood star on this show for people who are new to the channel. Yeah, well, maybe the story of when I first watched The Big Lebowski, I'll keep for the TRS extra on Sunday. Jonathan.
Just it's like we sound so radical. It's like get rid of the United Nations. We don't need the United Nations. And I think oftentimes when you present individualism to someone, they kind of throw out this total false impression of like, I remember when I was promoting a new textbook of Americanism, people say, oh, you're an individualist. So that just means you want to live on an island and never talk to anyone. So they throw out this completely false. So I think the idea of you're against the United Nations, people hear that as like, well, you just want to act unilaterally. You don't believe in communication. You don't believe in partnership. You're just, and like, I don't believe that's the proper function or role of government necessarily, but so it's this false dichotomy once again of either fund this idea, this institution. And let me ask you, do you think it's, we always talk about the infestation of terrible ideas into academia, how all this pro-Hamas and just anti-Western ideas are taught in universities around the world. I mean, isn't just the same infestation in the United Nations? I mean, who works at the United Nations other than people who were in these government schools 10 years ago, 5 years ago? So, it's just a culture at large, but the problem is United Nations is where, governments exist. It's not just education. It's not just school.
It's the inevitable conclusion or the inevitable next step. I think, we are radical in saying this because we are challenging the consensus. We're challenging the status quo. You're saying that something that has existed for all our lifetimes should go away. And yeah, challenging the status quo is radical, and it takes courage to say we're going to change something. But when something is bad, you should judge it for what it is. And when you see that it's bad, and hopefully we're helping people see that the United Nations is bad, I think that makes it a little bit less difficult. Kirk.
Yeah, I wonder how many people are still kind of sold on the United Nations based on this idea that it was founded, going back to the preamble, that it was like founded on good intentions and that, oh, it was meant to prevent war. Well, how good of a job is it at doing that? I guess you could say like a large scale, like the size of World War I and World War II, we have not really had since, but is that really to thank for the United Nations? I'm not so sure that it is. And then when you really think about like what Hitler and the Nazis wanted and what Imperial Japan wanted, as if like if they just had a voice at some international governing body like the United Nations to hear them out, like World War II wouldn't have happened. Hitler never would have, and the Nazis would have never like established concentration camps or invaded Poland or anything. And then it's like, especially when you consider that they teamed up with Stalin and the Soviet Union to start World War II by dividing up Poland and starting to invade various parts of Eastern Europe. I think that's a pretty crazy idea that the United Nations may have prevented World War II if only Nazi Germany had a panel where they could have aired their grievances, I guess.
Yeah, and the idea is even more ridiculous when you think of the fact that the method by which the United Nations is supposed to prevent wars is the same method by which Britain tried to prevent a war with Germany, and that didn't really work out. So the way World War II could have been, let's say, perhaps less bad, ended quicker, with a more decisive, or the victory was decisive enough, but quicker, would be if Britain had recognized the threat, had acted preemptively. So that's something that maybe an organization of free countries could have could have helped bring about.
I have to
John.
say, I mean, I don't follow the UN terribly closely. I mean, I think I'd probably rather watch Test Pattern, but you do, Razi, especially. I mean, isn't it safe to say that like the number of resolutions they have against Israel is beyond disproportionate? I mean, I always seem to think they always like condemning Israel for something. And when you look back and just look at the big picture, exactly as Rand said to Donahue in the early 80s, it's like, this is my words now, but like Israel is that one sliver of individualism, Western capitalism, entrepreneurialism in the entire cesspool that is the Middle East, that theologic, Muslim cesspool that is the Middle East, barbaric. Israel is that one sliver of hope, and that's who gets the condemnation over and over again.
Yeah, and since we did do a few episodes about the UN recently, I did look it up on the UN Watch has UN Watch does a fantastic job. If you're not following UN Watch, do so. And yeah, their most recent report said that in 2023 there were 14 resolutions, General Assembly resolutions about Israel, and 7 about the rest of the world. So that is the United Nations in a nutshell. Mark.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I mean, to Jonathan's point, where people put us up in this false dichotomy, to be an individualist means you want to be an island unto yourself. No, we love cooperation. We love working with other people. We understand that we are made better by those kinds of relationships. We just don't think we're made better by conspiring with criminals to murder ourselves and to steal from us. So, and I think it's foolishness to think that you can conspire with criminals and not get dirty and not be a criminal yourself. So again, if my word has any say in the world out there, I say get out of the UN.
Now, international bodies. So the World Economic Forum it's not part of the UN. It's a different body, but it's along the same lines, and we really don't have much to say about it, I think, today, but we can just show a clip. You may have seen this because Elon Musk shared it. Mark has, I can see from his reaction, just to see kind of the thinking that goes into, well, I'll stop talking. This speaks for itself.
A tua irmã chaya no Camaru Anuri, no Camai, no Camwaka, na Anuri, no Yuyuá, na Warron Chinambo, Panque, Tu Chinam, Chavawaki, Chinamo Kikirani, Tsai Chavakirani, Tsai Makikirani. Awama Wananã, no Mahu no Wai Sharai.
Tepid applause. Razi, those are the morons that think they can determine the economic policy of the world. They probably thought that shaman was blowing wisdom into their brains, but actually she was blowing what little brain matter there was left in those heads out of their skulls. So
I love
that should frighten everybody.
Yeah, that's one of those things that you can't help but laugh, but also you think, yeah, because it's not some random people, performing some ceremony in the woods. It should be terrifying. I love Willful Thinker's comment, which is the first thing I thought when I saw this. I hope they're all vaccinated. Yeah, a couple of years ago, this forum was probably done via Zoom. I don't think this would have been accepted. Generally, I am, not super worried about such stuff, but I wouldn't want some random person blowing whatever she's blowing, in my head.
Wisdom. It's wisdom, Razi.
So I have to say, I mean, like primitive rituals like that always, I find them really bizarre. I don't respect them at all. I just think it's something like, when Rand said religion was a primitive form of philosophy. So I look at stuff like that and I think, that meant something like before we had, I don't know, electricity, before we had knowledge, back when we were really living on a very, in my opinion, subhuman level, very early point in man's existence. So I don't have a lot of respect for those type of really primitive tribal rituals. I just think they're creepy and weird now.
Jonathan, you're our local financial expert. You have a hedge fund. You've been a commentator on Fox News for decades. And
where this is going.
I just want to know, like, when you decide to buy, to sell, to whatever it is you people do on the market, do you have one of these people come and blow wisdom in your face?
No, I'm much more of a primacy of existence guy than a primacy of conscious guy. So consciousness guy, I should say. So no, I mean, I find these type of tribal primitive rituals and the fact that they're embraced at these multinational organizations is pretty emblematic of what they are.
By the way, James Valiant says in the chat, last year I understood they took shrooms. That sounds like, what they're doing now is a step down from shrooms. But anyway, that's just me. Kirk.
I think they should, at this point, they should turn the WEF into the WWF. While I was watching that clip, I just wanted Ted DiBiase's theme song to hit before Javier Milei comes out to cut a promo on all these crazy people. And that would have been a lot more valuable to the world than whatever the hell that was.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying. Millet kind of got a lot of, and I know he's certainly not an objectivist, but he got a lot of attention this last week. He spoke up right in Klaus Schwab's face. What if, again, I'm just throwing out, what if the UN became much more, Mark, to your point, like that, like a real throwdown, like when Adlai Stevenson said to the Soviets, "We see your missiles and we're not going to accept it."
I think it's a one-off. I think Milei did a great job. I think he shocked the world, but didn't shock a single person in the World Economic Forum. I think they're not going to change. They're determined to press their agenda, and they'll probably never invite him back again. What he should have done is completely said, this I don't recognize this forum as having any legitimacy at all, and here's why. And I'm walking off your stage and never coming back on purpose. So it's great if you can make a statement like that. I think the same statement can be done by a president here. He has a bully pulpit. I mean, he has the world as his stage, and he can say those things with equal, if not more powerful, vigor. He could say it there. I mean, it would make it a great statement. But then go. Don't even. There's no point in debating with people who are not only not going to change. They're just not. They're not worth your time. They're not worth the time. And
But
if anything, it gives them legitimacy to say they can stand in the room and debate with you as an equal, because they can't and they shouldn't.
Right. Like that's what I'm saying. Like representatives from North Korea, from Cuba, from China are able to go back to their populations and say, we met with the United Nations and it legitimizes them. And I think it keeps people much more enslaved over time.
But Jonathan, when you said Milei spoke right in Klaus Schwab's face, was it close enough to blow wisdom into it, or?
I don't know. That's I had heard that second. I believe.
But yeah,
Schwab introduced it, correct? Schwab is the one who introduced
the fact that Milei is speaking in a way that no leader is speaking anywhere in the world, and hopefully we'll get to do. I think it's going to be difficult for him. From the little I know about Argentinian politics, it's going to be difficult, but hopefully he can do a lot of it. And look, people of the world will see what happens in Argentina and maybe demand the same here.
Well, and I'll just quickly say, I know I don't want to dominate, but he talked about the morality and the nobility of the businessman. A lot of us think, I'll say, he didn't rip that, but he was certainly inspired by Miss Rand's speech about America's persecuted minority, big business. So that's on YouTube. Take this opportunity to check it out.
I mean,
Kirk, I need to.
Milei's already a stud, but I would have loved him even more if he would have suplexed Klaus Schwab.
Yeah, on Kirk's point, first of all, WWF had to change their name to WWE like 20 something years ago because the Panda Bears sued them. And yeah, Ted DiBiase, I actually read an interview with him years ago, and because he was the $1 million man, that was his character, he was actually flying, I don't know if it's first class or private jets, but flying comfortably. Yeah, so he definitely would fit well in the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, I think that was part of his character. I think the WWF gave him a lot of money to live the life to like really add to the character from what I've read about him.
Yeah.
Did make the junkyard dog live in a junkyard? I mean, how true to form.
There was a time in wrestling where you had to actually live the character rather than all these behind the scenes we're all friends kind of thing, which but yeah, anyway, some of us are wrestling purists. Speaking of wrestling, by the way, since this is now a topic on my mind, Mark.
It sounds like we got 3 Marks on the show today, not just Mark Pellegrino.
Mark knows where this is going. Mark actually did a show about a movie about wrestling, which was called. Oh, he's now off. I forget it, but if
I'm not going to say it. Are you kidding me?
Oh, really? Look, we
Come
have
on,
lots of viewers.
man.
They're all going to, we
Come
have
on,
lots of viewers.
man.
They're all going to go watch this right after.
That's humiliating. But once you do a film, it's out there, man. It's out there forever, good or bad, good, bad, or ugly. It's
What was
there.
it?
It's a Hulk Hogan movie called No Holds Barred. I'll say it. I don't care.
Yeah.
There's
Oh my
there's nothing I can
Oh,
there's nothing I could do about it. I
You
did
were
get nominated.
a fan.
I did get nominated for a Razzie, so I'm very happy about that. If you're gonna go bad, you might as well go all the way bad.
Dude, that's awesome. That is really super cult level status. You've gone up way big time in my book right now.
And
What was
by the
that?
way, that
88, 89?
80, 88. Yeah, and Tom Wright was the director of that, who directs a bunch of Supernatural. So we didn't hook up again until 20 years later on the show Supernatural. But little piece of trivia for Supernatural fans out there. Come on, buddy.
I sat next to Zeus on a plane once. Really, really cool guy.
Yeah, he passed away.
Yeah.
Not to get dour, but yeah.
Well,
Well, Razi, you'll probably I don't know if you'll be comforted to know this, but I did go to a WWF event when I was playing Randy, and it was at the Olympic Forum in Los Angeles. I don't know if that venue still exists, and most of the people around me actually thought it was real. So
Is the Olympic Forum what is now the Kia Forum?
it could be. I don't know.
Well, I was at a wrestling show a couple of months ago there. So people there did not think it was real, but enjoyed it nonetheless. All right, I think the wrestling segment of this show has run its course.
I'll just say, I mean, I do see some kind of metaphors there, if you will, because you know what? When the Hulkster came in, you knew he was, what did they say? The baby. He was the good guy. He was the good guy. And when the Iron Sheik came in, and who was the other one? The Boris guy, the tall one, the Russian guy. They were the bad guys. And there was like a clear, it wasn't like, well, you got two people here. It was just obvious who are the good guys and the bad guys. And maybe that's the real evil, to Kirk's point about whitewashing here, evil of the UN. It kind of says, well, we all have a vote. You know, North Korea's got a vote, America's got a vote, Canada's got a vote. Whitewash the fact of like, who are we voting with? Some of the worst countries on earth, countries where they throw gay people off buildings, and just now are finally letting a woman vote.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually true. And wrestling used to reflect the culture, and a part of it was Hulk Hogan would come in with an American flag, and his song was Real American, and the bad guys were the Iron Sheik with an Iranian flag. And I don't remember the Russian in the 80s, but a Russian with a Soviet flag. And you knew who to cheer for and who to boo, because it was clear who the good guy. That's not that long ago. So yeah.
Don't forget when they turned Sergeant Heel to a bad guy when he was a Saddam Hussein supporter during the Iraq War.
Sergeant Slaughter turned heel.
I think it could have been Nikolai Volkov.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
part
was
of the Bolsheviks.
So yeah, I mean, when I was watching this video from the World Economic Forum, one of the things I was shocked about was you don't hear any laughter from the audience. Like, I don't know how
You
many
hear applause. You hear like two or three people actually applauding.
but how is there not one person? You know that Seinfeld episode where he puts the Pez dispenser on her knee, on Elaine's knee, and then she starts laughing, and it stops the whole it's a piano recital, and it stops it because people hear the laughter. There's not one person. How is there not a single person there who couldn't? I'm sure they were all laughing on the inside, or many of them. How is there not one person who thought, what the fuck is that? Where am I? Like,
Yeah,
what
you
is
know
going
what?
on here?
You may be right. There may have been a number of people who thought, "What the fuck am I doing here?" But not a single one of them had the cashews to stand up and say it.
I would not be able to hold back I would be the one laughing and
You individualist freak.
Well, if you do anything today, take this opportunity to pick up your copy of Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, read what Rand said about the United Nations, 20 plus years ago, and speak up against it. You don't have to like go, down and make a huge ruckus, but when someone says like, well, the United Nations voted on it, you can say, you know what? I don't trust them. I don't believe in them. I don't sanction them. Here's why. Send them a link and, speak up a little bit. I think that's how you ultimately change the culture. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, who out there is saying disband and get rid of the United Nations? And have a moral understanding why. So avail yourself to what Rand wrote 50 years.
And Jonathan, actually, I want to ask you because El Rito asks in the chat, says, I felt cringe with the shaman clip, but please can someone explain why is it bad? And can you explain what the good is when it comes to economics, when it comes to finance, when it comes to thinking about, the economy? What is that an alternative to this, blowing wisdom in
I don't
people's
know.
heads?
It's like, to me, it's like elevating the completely mystical, the completely arbitrary, the completely primitive, as if blowing something or moving her hands is going to change reality at all. To me, it just looks silly.
So
And like,
what would be the good? What would be the right way to go about it?
well, I mean, look, I've been to some OCONs where there have been ceremonies. OCON, the Objectivist Conference that the Ayn Rand Institute puts on, has had some ceremonies. They've had some wonderful speeches and readings and poems that have had applause. They've had some musical performances. So I think there's other types of ceremony you can do that's a lot more meaningful than an ancient tribal custom that just looks silly and weird and elevates the mystical.
I was just trying to get some free financial advice from
Oh,
Jonathan, but Kirk.
I got nothing to add at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's scary when they pray in Congress or when they ask the Lord for inspiration in Congress. It's even worse when they go further back in time to a Stone Age civilization, appealing to whatever mystic orientation they have for wisdom or enlightenment. I mean, it tells me that people are not using their noodle. They're not using their brain. They're using something else. And what we need are people using their brain. What I would prefer to see is some kind of a mission statement of sorts that like clarifies exactly what their mission is there. It gives their subconscious the hint of what exactly it is they need to pursue while they're there, and that mission statement becomes the focus of all of their action, of all of their speeches, of all of their attempts to persuade one another or come up with solutions for whatever the problems are. This just leads me down the path of a deeper conviction that these people have their heads up a warm, dark place that doesn't smell that great.
And if you have to have a salute or something, you can also always say, what Israelis say, which is l'chaim, right? To life, right? Celebrate like life, not the ancient, mystical, primitive. It's celebrate to living here on earth, right here today.
Yeah, L'chaim is the best cheers that I know of in any language. And yeah, I'm glad, Mark, you mentioned prayer because essentially there's no difference. This just looks more ridiculous, but it's the same thing.
And add to it the cultural condescension, them leaning into it eagerly. I mean, it's just like guilty white people trying to appease a culture that they think is benighted. It's so disgusting. It oozes for that white man's burden kind of philosophy that these people are trying to they look like they're shunning. They look like they're running towards the culture, but they're really condescending to it. It's gross on every level. It's so secondhanded. It's so gross.
Yeah, and if you're gonna say, let's get together, there's economic issues we need to solve and so on, what you do is you look to reality, not to a shaman, and you would maybe listen to Millet and end it there, because
And I don't know if you said it, Razi. You said or somebody said they were using mushrooms last time. Or at least
yeah.
there's some suggestion that evidence exists that really does open up a communication between the left and right hemispheres of your brain. It could have some real medicinal value. I mean that it's all speculative at this point, but at least there's a suggestion that has some real world value.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Let me put it this way. I wouldn't advocate for shrooms, but I would say if you're gonna choose between that and actually taking a shaman seriously, go for the shrooms. That is not, I'm not advocating breaking any laws. Do it where it's legal. But yeah. Any parting thoughts, Kirk?
I mean, yeah, we're talking about the World Economic Forum. This is where a lot of the thinkers, the brilliant thinkers, come together to talk about plans to move the world forward or whatnot. It's just like, why don't we Why don't we just pray for the world to move forward at this point, if this is what we're going to showcase at events like this?
Oh, and I just wanted to say, Rand talked a lot about the Attila and the witch doctor and the union between the two. It's never been more apparent than in that case where she's doing whatever she's doing with all of them, because they're the Attilas and she's the witch doctor, and they want the blessing of her so that they can use force on the rest of us to make the world into a place that they want it to be.
Jonathan.
I'll just say, in terms of the UN, to me, it's like, think about the company that you keep. You wouldn't have a racist in your house and say, well, I understand you're a huge racist, but tell me a little bit more. You'd say, I want to be with you. I don't want to associate with you. So think about all these absolutely corrupt regimes that are legitimized by the UN. And, if you wouldn't have them in your home, why would you be in an organization and give them a vote on anything? Let's end it.
So at the end of shows nowadays, I like to ask people, about their Twitter or X, or where, we can find out more about them. I love the fact that all three of you are actually on X, so you made it easy for me. Although if you have something else to promote, feel free. Kirk.
Yeah, I actually have two videos on this topic on my channel. One's titled "The United Nations is a Useless Organization." The other is "The United Nations is Still a Useless Organization." You can find those at my channel, Kirk Wilcox.
Mark.
Yeah, you can hit me up on X, Mark R. Pellegrino. If don't fight with me. I'm done fighting. I'm done fighting, I swear. But you can see my reality checks are pinned to my Twitter profile there if you want to watch my reality checks. I did one on Israel. I'm going to do one now on proportional responses. That's going to get me in a lot of trouble with people because, of course, I don't think there is such a thing as a proportional response when you're fighting for your life against a murderous enemy. That's sort of a spoiler, but not completely. You can also see me at Mark Ross Pelly on Instagram if you want a nicer feed with my animals and stuff. That's no politics allowed there. I also started Patreon, so you can hit me up there. I've done a couple movie reviews. I'm about to put up something about the intersection of psychology and philosophy, and I'm going to start, I think, a little book club there. And we're going to start with Don Watson's book on effective egoism, and we'll go through it chapter by chapter and talk about it. Maybe get a discussion group going. And so that's what I'm doing right now.
That's Don Watkins, and he will be on this show on the next episode, basically Monday, next non-members episode. So Jonathan.
Quickly, the new book is Can You Really Love a Dog? Dr. Leonard Peikoff and Ayn Rand on Pets at Amazon. Thank you, Razi, and thanks for a great week.
Thanks. I'm at Razi Ginsburg on X. I'm only a few followers away from 1,000. So whoever is the 1,000 follower on X gets a free visit from a shaman if the UN agrees to pay for it, or the World Economic Forum. Thanks, guys. I'll be back here tomorrow with the Daily Objective. We'll be back here on Sunday for members only with the Reality Show Extra, and on Monday with the reality show. See you then.